The summer sun had only just begun to rise when I stepped out onto the porch of my family's farm. The air was crisp, filled with the earthy smell of tilled soil and the faint scent of hay. My name is Laura Mitchell, and for as long as I can remember, this farm has been the backdrop to every chapter of my life. My parents had passed it down to me, and though times were tough, I worked day in and day out to keep it alive. Running a farm was never easy, but it became especially overwhelming after my husband left me. The end of that marriage had left a void in my heart and a heaviness on my shoulders. I carried on because I had to, but there were nights when I sat by the window, staring out at the fields, wondering if I could really keep everything afloat. That summer, my sister called me with a request that would change the course of everything. Her son, my nephew Ethan, was going through a difficult time. He had just turned 19 and was struggling to find direction after graduating high school. He had always been a bright kid, but he'd fallen into the wrong crowd, skipping college applications and spending more nights out than at home. My sister thought that a summer on the farm might give him perspective. She said he needed responsibility, structure, and maybe even a little tough love. At first, I hesitated. My own heart was raw, and I wasn't sure I was the right person to guide a young man searching for his place. But I also knew the farm could use another set of hands, and deep down, I wanted to help him. So I told her to send him my way. Ethan arrived on a breezy June morning, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder, his eyes half open as though he'd just rolled out of bed. He had grown taller since I'd last seen him, his shoulders broader, but there was a weariness in his posture. He gave me a half-smile when he saw me, and I hugged him tightly, determined to be the kind of steady presence he needed. The first few days weren't easy. Farm life started at sunrise, and Ethan wasn't used to waking up before noon. The first morning I shook him awake at 5:30, he groaned, buried his face in the pillow, and mumbled something about child labor. I laughed and pulled the covers off him, telling him that if he didn't move, the cows would be more than happy to march right in and wake him themselves. At breakfast, I laid out a plate of eggs, bacon, and toast, but I could see him staring longingly at his phone instead of the food. I told him that on the farm, phones stayed on the counter until after chores were done. He rolled his eyes, but to my surprise, he placed it down without arguing further. Those early mornings became a ritual. We fed the chickens together, mucked the stalls, and carried heavy bales of hay into the barn. At first, Ethan dragged his feet, sighing at every task, but slowly, I saw him begin to change. There was something grounding about the rhythm of farm life, about the way the earth responded to your effort. He started to take pride in finishing each chore, even if he tried to hide it behind his usual sarcastic remarks. One morning, after we finished fixing a broken fence post, Ethan sat on the grass beside me and wiped the sweat from his forehead. He said, "You know, Aunt Laura, I didn't think I'd last a week here. But it's different. Feels like I can actually breathe here." I smiled, because that was exactly what I hoped he would find. The farm had always been my sanctuary, and I wanted it to become his, too. But it wasn't just the farm work that brought us closer. It was the conversations we had in between. Ethan began opening up about things he had never shared before. He told me about his friends pressuring him to go down paths he didn't want, about his fear of disappointing his parents, and about how lost he felt not knowing what came next. I listened without judgment, offering advice when he asked for it, but mostly just giving him the space to be heard. As the weeks passed, our bond grew stronger. He started doing things on his own without me asking, waking up earlier, tending to the animals, even fixing small problems around the barn. I could see the pride in his eyes when he'd show me a fence he repaired, or a section of the field he'd plowed straight. He was becoming someone he didn't even realize he could be. But life has a way of testing us when we least expect it. One late afternoon, as a storm rolled in, I received a call that shook me. My ex-husband had been telling people in town that I wouldn't be able to keep the farm much longer, that I was drowning in debt and clinging to something already lost. His words spread like wildfire, and soon enough, neighbors began to ask questions, their pitying looks cutting into me like knives. I tried to hide my frustration, but Ethan noticed. He saw me pacing the porch late that night, my arms wrapped around myself, tears welling in my eyes. He came out quietly and sat beside me. For a long while, we just listened to the rain. Then he said, "Aunt Laura, don't listen to him. You're stronger than anyone I know. And this farm? It's not going anywhere, not while you've got me here." Those words meant more than I could express. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was carrying the burden alone. The summer went on, and with each passing day, Ethan became more than just my nephew. He became my right hand, my confidant, and in many ways, the son I never had. We laughed together, argued over little things like who stacked hay better, and shared quiet moments watching the sun dip behind the horizon. By the time August rolled around, the farm looked better than it had in years. The fences were sturdy, the fields thriving, and the animals healthy. But more than that, something inside both of us had healed. Ethan had found purpose, and I had found hope again. When it came time for him to return home, neither of us wanted the summer to end. He hugged me tightly at the train station, his eyes shining. He promised he would come back next summer, maybe even sooner. And as I watched him leave, I realized that the farm had given us more than work and chores. It had given us connection, resilience, and the kind of love that only family can create. Even now, when I walk through the fields at dawn, I think of Ethan's laughter echoing in the barn, of the way he grew into himself here. And I remind myself that sometimes, when life feels too heavy to bear, the answer is not in running away, but in leaning on the people we love, even if it's the last person we expected. Because that summer, my nephew didn't just help me on the farm. He reminded me of who I was, and he showed me that even broken things can grow again, with enough care and patience. And that is the truest story I could ever tell.